that first year and that first summer, those lower branches are shading the trunk of the tree. And they're providing a little bit of shade to help it in the heat of that first summer. And then also those lower branches have more leaves, and more leaves means more food for the tree. And so that also is going to help in that establishment process if it has more places to be making food. So that's something that I always look for. And then girdling roots. This is when we're going to see lots of pictures of this later, but when our roots start to circle around the tree. A lot of times in our nurseries, a root flare might be buried, and the root flare is where the trunk of the tree spreads out into the roots. And so sometimes they're moving things so fast, there's maybe putting too much soil in, so you maybe have to even dig down to that root flare, find the root flare. That is where you always want to be planting to. And then you want to look and see, are there circling roots? And sometimes you can't catch, all of the circling roots or find everything at the nursery. So maybe when you go home and you start planting, you're seeing things, but we'll kind of go over how to address that. And then as you're going through the soil, if there's anything that smells really bad, you definitely do not want to get that tree. That is, potentially rot or decay that's happening in there, and you don't want that. So on the opposite side, like we mentioned, the strong central leader, a balanced canopy, where it's nice and even. We want to find our root flare, and then appropriate size for the container. If we have a 7-foot tree in a 5-gallon container, that is not the appropriate soil volume size for that size of tree. And that probably means that the roots are going to be really bad and really circled and girdled, and we don't want that. And then, like I mentioned, those smaller lower branches. So here's just a few pictures kind of showing something. So this is, we're not seeing the whole tree, but this is a co-dominant. We got some, included bark here, like I mentioned. So basically that you can see there that is a weak attachment. You can see that split happening down the middle. And I'm sure if you just pulled on this a little bit, it would just want to crack right open. And this is so low to the base of the tree as well, that if and potentially when this does break, I'm not sure if that tree would be able to survive. And then here's a picture of some trunk damage, this split here, this rip along the bark here. Sometimes that can happen in transport. Maybe a nursery is delivering to you. Don't be afraid to, if they're taking things off the truck and then you see it has this trunk damage that you say, no thanks, I don't want that one. And they should replace it for you. And there's a bunch of nurseries around the valley, and we'll share with you um, a directory basically of a ton of nurseries throughout Arizona that maybe give you a little bit more options when it comes to going and finding a tree. And just to kind of put things in perspective, we have this is we're starting in our smaller pots. These are our 5-gallon trees, and these are still babies. They're still being grown up. And then, as we go, we move up a pot, up a pot, up a pot, like until progressive sizing. And so in that 5-gallon pot, sometimes they'll stay in there too long. And, tree roots, we know they want to go out. So they're trying to go out. They hit the pot of this 5-gallon container and start to wrap around. And then they take it out eventually. They put it into the 15-gallon container, put more soil into the 15-gallon container. And then someone buys it. And they're going through the roots and they're like, oh, these roots look great. But then they dig down further and then they find all the girdling at the 5-gallon size. So you always kind of want to be mindful. And again, we'll kind of go into a little bit more details on like checking that root stock and things to look out for. And then this is just a few pictures of those 15-gallon trees, those 15-gallon desert willows that I was just showing. So you can see in this one over here, we can see our root flare, but we see, this one isn't too bad. We do see this root like kind of folding over itself. Um, this could, you know, probably be clipped pretty easily. From this picture, we're not seeing too much more. This root flare is very high out of the pot. We definitely not really looking for this either. And even though we're not seeing too much circling, you know, we are seeing a lot of our root flare kind of exposed and potentially dried out. And I will say sometimes, you know, this isn't as common as the root flare being buried too deep. That is more common in our nursery pots. And so sometimes whenever you're going to plant or you're looking for that root flare, um, you might see some roots and you're like, oh, is this the flare? But it might not be. It might be what we call advantageous roots, which is basically if the root flare is buried, the roots will start coming out of the trunk of the tree to kind of try to get access to that water and oxygen that it needs, kind of giving a false root flare. So you really want to look for those stabilizing roots. So you really want to find um, where the trunk of the tree gets bigger and you're seeing those anchoring roots. That's what we're looking for. And then other things, whenever we're, you know, going to get a tree is what size tree are you wanting to plant? These are the most common sizes that we have here. Our 5 gallon. I know these pictures are a little hard to tell scale, but 5 gallon fit easily in any car. 15 gallon, I can fit one, sometimes two, depending on the type of tree it is and my SUV. A 25 gallon and a 24-inch box. Those you probably need a truck or something for. And then a 36-inch box and a 48-inch box. Those you're probably only planting with some sort of machinery. Um, we mostly plant 5 gallons and 15 gallons. We find that they're easy to handle with volunteers or with other people. You don't need any sort of machinery. Um, and also the roots, you know, the tree hasn't been living as long in a container, so sometimes the roots are a little bit better. And for a lot of, especially with our native trees, whether you plant a 5 gallon or even a 25 gallon, sometimes after that year 5 mark, you really can't tell. Especially if you're getting a nice quality on the 5 gallon, that's my recommendation. But also each person, you know, this is kind of something for you to think about on your own of what you want. Um, and then you also want to consider who is planting your tree. Are you planting it yourself? Is a friend or a neighbor coming out to help you plant it? Are you hiring an arborist to do it? Or maybe you have a landscaper that has offered to plant your tree, or even nurseries sometimes offer to come out and plant trees. Um, so I would say these top three choices between you, a friend or family, or an arborist, these are our best people to plant a tree. If we have a landscaper or the nursery coming out to plant the tree, I highly encourage you to be a bit of a watchdog when it comes to the tree planting, because they might not have the certifications. They are more likely to kind of uh, do these common mistakes that we see. A lot of the common mistakes that we see are landscapers. Basically, every single parking lot tree that I see uh, is planted in properly, and a lot of times that's from, you know, a landscape, like a contracted landscaper they have coming in or something like that. So you really want to do your due diligence, and maybe even say, hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So it's super specific because, you know, the difference between your tree living 70 years versus living 20 years, a lot of that is going to come down to how well are you planting your tree and helping it get established. So it's super important and you want to do it right. And so now thinking about what common mistakes do we see? I would say most commonly planting our tree too deep. In this picture here, you know, this one, someone dug down, uh, and I'm still not even positive if that's the root flare here, and we're already down, you know, it looks like it was originally planted about 8 inches too deep. This is a common mistake. A lot of people don't realize it. They think, oh, I want my tree to be really stable, so I just want to throw it deep in the ground to make it stable. But that root flare that I mentioned, it's very important for oxygen and water flow and resource flow up and down the tree. And so we want that right near the surface because that's going to help the tree communicate from the roots to the leaves and encourage those roots to really go out and anchor themselves. And then, people not thinking through those questions that we mentioned of what kind of space, what kind of things they need to consider when planting their tree. So, and that leads us to wrong tree, wrong place. I will say with this one, I do think that the tree was there first, and then all of this was built around it, and they probably just chopped the tree back. But it does make for a very silly picture with electrical boxes and a building, and this very poorly pruned tree just right in the middle. So again, going through and finding the right tree for the space that you have. And then something that I see in basically every parking lot, every condo complex across Arizona is not removing the nursery stake. Um, this is something that we'll talk about how we can do that, how we can do that at home and make sure our stake is still stable or our tree is still stable. And then improper watering. Uh, you know, there is no one size fits all when it comes to watering, but there are best practices that we can follow to avoid mistakes. Most commonly, I would say, is people don't realize that whenever they're watering their tree, they need to be expanding out their watering. And what I mean by that is watering at what we call the drip line. So the drip line is kind of the edge of our canopy. So you can see the tree, it's wet right here. This is where the water is going. We want to be watering out here. Because if you think about it, those roots are going out. And so if you're watering here, you're not really like watering the absorbing roots. But if you're watering out here, that's where, we can guess where the canopy is where some of those roots are and and water there and make sure the tree is actually getting that water. Um, and then this photo here, I really like because this kind of shows the potential long-term impact of planting your tree too deep. So this is the same sidewalk here. This is just opposite sides of the sidewalk. And I will say I am taking a guess that these trees were planted at the same time, just based on looking at them. But you can see this tree here, we can see the root flare. And this tree here, we cannot see the root flare. And you can tell this one is smaller. The trunk isn't as thick. There's less, branches, less shade, less benefits from the tree. Whereas this one, the trunk is a bit thicker. We can see that root flare. That canopy looks a lot bigger. So, it's not something, if you plant it too deep, you're not going to see it in a week. You're going to see it in 10, 15 years when you're like, my tree just won't get any bigger. That's probably why. And if you have trees at home where you're like, dang, I think my tree is planted too deep, you can always go and dig out a well. Kind of like what that person was doing in this picture. You can kind of keep digging out and create a nice little well where we're exposing that root flare. So it's not too late. And so now kind of those are the main mistakes that we see. We're going to kind of go over the proper planting steps that we recommend to help avoid those mistakes. So first, you want to prep your site. So think about all those questions and choose the right tree for you and choose the right planting location. And then, like I mentioned before, we're going to call 811 to mark the underground utilities. It is the law, and we want to be safe and we want to make sure that when we're digging, we're not digging into any potential pipes underneath. And then once we have our location and we've called 811 and we know it's a good spot for our tree, I always recommend to soak the area. Just soak it for a bit, let that water sink down, and then come back the next day. It'll make digging a lot easier for you. So once you've prepped your site, then you're ready to start digging your hole. And always, always, always use proper PPE and the right tools for the job. Um, so hats and gloves always, especially here in the sun. Um, a pickaxe is really helpful for breaking through our dirt here. Rakes can be super helpful with our backfilling when we just have a little bit left. And then a hose is always good. We need to make sure our tree is getting watered. And then I like to recommend a tarp or a wheelbarrow if you're planting at home. Whenever we're taking out that dirt from the hole, if you're putting it in either the gravel that's around it or the grass that's around it, you're going to lose some of that soil. And so putting it in a tarp or a wheelbarrow kind of minimizes the dirt that you're going to use and makes the backfilling process a little bit easier. And so once we have our right PPE and tools, we can start our digging. And first we're going to measure our root flare. So this can just be an estimate. In this picture, we have a tape measure out, but a lot of times we'll just use a shovel. We'll just put a shovel next to the pot and we'll, maybe have to dig down. Again, sometimes it's buried, find that root flare, measure to there, and that's how deep you want your hole. And then once you have that depth, you can start digging. And so our hole should be about 90% of the root ball. So kind of going up just to that root flare, and then 2 times the diameter of the root ball. This is a nice graphic to kind of show this is a very wide hole. Wide is always like the wider the better is always really nice when possible, because just thinking about again our roots wanting to go out, it makes it a little bit easier as they're trying to find their way if that soil is a little bit looser, more disturbed for them. And that also is going to help with water kind of penetrating down. So this is kind of just a helpful graphic, and you can see that 90% of the root ball. And then once we feel like our hole is the right size, we're going to measure it again, take our shovel, go up to the root flare, put it back in the hole. You can put your rake or another tool across the hole and kind of take the cross section, make sure it's the right height. And then once we've measured and ensured that, then we're gonna rough up the sides. And what I mean by this is we have very clay heavy soil here in Arizona. And so whenever we're using our shovels, the smooth back end of our shovel as you're going down can create kind of a glazing along the side of our hole. So if you see smooth sides along the side of your hole, you kind of want to rough it up, or just take a shovel or a pick and kind of bang around the sides a little bit. Also, sometimes just hosing down the sides helps break that dirt apart. Because if you don't, once it gets water in there, it can create kind of basically like pottery, where we're creating a glaze, and then as those roots are going out, rather than trying to break through that hard surface, they're going to again take the path of least resistance and start wrapping around our hole rather than going out. So we always recommend that. And then filling your hole with water for a drainage test. This is also going to make the soil a little bit more moist for the tree once it's in the ground and have a little bit more available water, which is always good. And it helps if you have good drainage in that area. If for some reason your water has not drained in 24 hours, you likely have caliche, which if you have somehow dug a hole and have the ability to run a drainage test in caliche, I am very impressed how you even were able to dig that hole. But if you do run into caliche, you can create some drainage holes to where you're kind of basically digging down a little bit deeper in some spots to kind of help the water drain out, or choose a different area. And again, if you even dug into it after any amount of soaking, I feel like caliche is so difficult to get through. I'm impressed that you were able to dig that hole. So now we have our hole ready, and we're going to get our tree ready to go into the ground. So we're gonna tip our tree over. We're going to kind of press on the sides like you see here, and loosen up the root ball out of the container. And then with it tipped over, you're going to have one person hold the base of the tree and then someone else kind of just gently slide the container off of the tree. You don't want to just rip your tree out. You don't want to be causing any trunk damage or adding any additional stress to the tree before it's about to be planted. And then we're going to really take our time looking at the roots. You can see in this picture here, you can see where that pot was and where those roots, all of those like white little roots are going around, because again, it was just circling around that pot. So sometimes we'll take a saw if it's really bad and just kind of shave the sides of the roots so they're going out. That's what we want to see is the roots going out. Or, using your hands, kind of roughing them up, or sometimes a knife, scoring the sides, anything to make sure our roots are going out. And people tend to be nervous about this or not want to do it because they don't want to disturb the tree. But it is so much better to address girdling roots when you're planting the tree than having to have a tree that is going to get choked out later on. Because basically that is what will happen with girdling roots is, your trunk of your tree is getting bigger and you have a root that's wrapping around that's also getting bigger. And then that basically is going to start to choke the base of the tree. And also, if you're at home and have a hose handy, it's really nice to hose down your root ball because some of our like small feeder roots, they can dry out pretty quickly. And so we want to make sure those stay moist. And then also having a hose sometimes can help us find more of those girdling roots. So now just some pictures of kind of what I mean by this. So this is a young, this was, I think, a 15-gallon tree that we shook some dirt off of, and now we're seeing the girdling roots. So this going across here. And you don't want to, if I was coming and pruning this, I wouldn't want to prune here because then we're thinking, okay, we prune here. Well, that root is still going to go out that way and it's still wrapping around there. So that doesn't really address the problem. So you want to come back to where that bend is and cut it before the bend so it's going out. Another picture. These ones I did not take, so I'm doing my best kind of with what I have to explain what I think is going on. But so this is a mature mesquite tree that had some roots that were never addressed when it was younger, and you can see they cut one that was going across here, and then they cut that other one. So they cut this one with the X on it, and you can see that indent in the trunk there, and where it was choking the tree there. And again, that cambium layer is right there. If it's restricting it, it's going to make it harder for nutrients to flow up and down. And then just another picture. This one has a lot of circling roots, and you can see we're cutting them back here. So they go out. Don't be afraid to make your root ball look like this. You don't need to be super gentle with it. You really want to find the roots and make sure that they look the way you want them to. And then this is a dead ash tree that we took out at a site that has lots of crazy roots going on. It is upside down in this picture. So this is the trunk, and you can see, it didn't get too big before it was planted. It has a lot of roots that are circling around, and also it's a little bit hard to see, but with ash trees, our ash trees here are grafted. So that means that basically they're taking a strong rootstock and then grafting the kind of variety of ash tree to the top of that rootstock. So this tree, we can kind of see here where this dark line is, that's where it was planted to, but that's not where the root flare is. That's where the graft is. So, if they saw it, oh, it's going out, that must be the root flare. The root flare was down here. So this was planted about a foot too deep because of that. And so, again, find that root flare. That's also probably why, it died so small too. Just kind of a mixture of these different factors. So now we've addressed our roots. It's ready to be planted. So uh, when it's time to put our tree into the hole, we are going to measure again, and then measure another time, and then one more time for just to be certain. Because that's our most common mistake, and the thing that we want to avoid is planting our tree too deep. So again, laying a shovel across, and seeing, is that root flare even, or maybe even just slightly above grade with our surface there. Because whenever we water it and we're taking out all of the soil, and then we're putting in all of this loose soil. There's a bunch of different air pockets in there now. And so once we water it, it's going to sink down a little bit. So if you put it slightly above grade, just an inch or half an inch above grade, then once that settles and those air pockets kind of collapse after being filled with water, that settling that'll happen will make it nice and even with the ground level. Um, and, again, after you've messed with the roots, your root ball might be a little bit smaller. So that's another reason why we want to measure. Um, and one thing I didn't mention, but is I also always recommend when the tree is on its side, looking at the bottom of the root ball. We find a lot of matted roots along the bottom. Sometimes you can just pull those off, you can saw them off, but uh, we don't want it matted. Again, we want them going out. Um, and then once we put it in the hole, we want to check and make sure the orientation of the branches is the way that we want it. Thinking about, okay, where are the buildings at? Where are walkways at? Am I going to have a branch that's going to need to be pruned back a bunch if I put it this way? So twisting it around in the hole to get it how you want it to um, when it when it grows. And then we are always going to backfill with native soil. We do not recommend adding amendments. The only time when it might be helpful to add amendments is if you have done a soil test. Because if you haven't done a soil test, you don't really know what your soil is actually lacking. So if you're amending it and you're buying stuff to put in there, it might not be what the soil actually needs. And most of our basically like 90% of our trees really never need soil amendments. The only ones that might need it are citrus or some of our fruit trees that maybe require a little bit more. But with most of our shade or all of our shade trees, always backfill with native soil. And uh, I say about every 6 inches of backfill that you do, you're going to tamp down a little bit. Again, kind of remove some of those air pockets, reduce the amount of sinking that's happening. And then any soil that might have fallen off from the container as you were messing with the roots, leave that to the side and we'll kind of use that at the end. And then once our tree is planted and it's in the ground and we have it the way we want it, we're going to give it a nice, I like to do a nice, quick soak where I'm just kind of filling up the area with water. And sometimes I'll even put the hose into the backfilled dirt in a couple of spots, again, just to kind of help remove those air pockets. And then once it's fully saturated, then we can add the rest of that container soil. And then if we have organic mulch on top. And you can see here with our organic mulch, we're still keeping that root flare clear. We want, we don't want to mulch volcano, as they say, which is just piling a bunch of mulch, up on a volcano, like on the tree, where it is going to trap a lot of moisture against the trunk. We don't want to do that. So we want to see that root flare and have mulch surrounding it. And then once we have our mulch on there, I like to do another water, but this time a slow, deep soak. So just putting your hose on a slow drip and leaving it there for a while. Maybe every so often, kind of putting it at a different point around your tree. So after we planted our tree, we want it to look something like this. We can see that root flare or that top of that root ball there. Same with this one, that water is still soaking in. And then if, some of our bushier trees don't come with a nursery stake, but if your tree comes with a nursery stake, always remove it. And then if it is not able to stand on its own, then we can add stabilizing stakes. But never leave the nursery stake on there. Trees need to be able to move in the wind. It creates what we call reaction wood, which really helps the trunk of the tree get bigger. Um, and it's kind of similar to, I like to think of it as working out and building up muscle. You're, breaking it down, building it back up. That's what our tree is doing when it's moving in the wind. So if it can't stand on its own, we can grab two stakes. We use, like the lodgepole stakes, but if you just have a nursery stake on hand, you can use, a nursery stake on one side and maybe even like a tomato stake or something else on the other side. Um, and we just want to put it at least a foot away from the trunk of the tree and maybe at slightly an angle because we want to avoid hitting the root ball. We don't want to stab our stake into the root ball of the tree, so we want to go about a foot outside. And then you want it to be far enough in the ground to where it's not going to come out. So we recommend 18 to 24 inches into the ground. Um, and then once you have those on, we use arbor ties, but they aren't necessary. You could use rope or maybe something strong, but not too abrasive. And something that maybe will kind of break down is easy to take off. I don't recommend using hose and wires. They used to be very common. I don't think they're as common now, but especially here in the heat, if you have hose and wires on, even if you're trying to take it off at the appropriate time, sometimes it's just so difficult to get off because the sun has just corroded it. Um, but so I like to use, an arbor tie or a rope that is a little bit softer, and I'll cut two pieces that are about an arm's length, and then when it comes to tying, we use a specific tie. I'm not going to try to explain that because I don't know knots well enough to be able to do that. Hopefully at some point we'll have a nice in-depth video that maybe shows that. But for now, what we want to focus on is with our first piece of arbor tie, we're going to loop it around the tree and we want to kind of create a pocket. Like you can see here, our tree is sitting in a pocket. So first piece of rope, we're making a little loop for our tree and then we're, bringing it over to the stake. And then our second rope is just being tied to that loop. So we're not tying the tree again, we're tying it to the loop and then wrapping it back around. If you do, one tie up here to the tree and then one tie down here to the tree, that tree can't really move in the wind as much. And also you're creating tension on opposite sides that if a big wind comes, you're honestly creating more likely for your tree to snap in that wind. So that's why we like to do it like that. And then we recommend about 2/3 of the way up the tree is kind of what you want when it comes to staking. You don't want to stake it down here because then, you have a lot of weight up here and your tree is still going to be very floppy. So most importantly with staking, sits in that pocket and can move in the wind. We're minimizing the amount of touch points the tree has with the rope. And then we want to check on it regularly and kind of see if the stakes are still needed. I say about 6 to 12 months, and then you can remove them. But if it's sooner than that, you notice that your tree is stable and doesn't need them anymore, take them out. We never want to leave them on too long because that can create issues like this. So we have our arbor ties running through the tree. We have, wires here. This tree isn't able to move. Here we have, this tree is just never going anywhere. I will say this tree is not in Phoenix. This is in San Diego. So it's not somewhere in Arizona doing this, but thought it was very ridiculous. So that's kind of planting best practices. And then With watering, again, there's no one size fits all. We want to think about the seasons and different things and our water source when it comes. But there are some things that we can follow. You always want to know the amount of water it takes to get to the proper watering depth. So you can use a water probe or a long screwdriver after you water for a bit, stick that into the ground, and see how far that can go in, and that gives you an idea of how far your watering is. And you want to do those slow, deep soaks. That's what's best for trees, for getting that water, again, not like the sprinkler irrigation. And then, especially um, with a drip system, you want to make sure that it's never just a set it and forget it. You want to make sure you're checking on your system. Maybe something broke over the season you want to check on. But also our frequency of water is going to change. So, it's hotter in the summer. The amount of frequency in which we're watering is going to increase in the summer, and it's going to decrease, in our cooler months. And so we want to be adjusting our watering system to adhere to that. And then we want to water at the drip line, and especially in the summer, I highly recommend watering early morning or late evening, because the sun is so hot. If you're watering in the middle of the afternoon when it's 110 out, you're losing a lot more of that water to evaporation. So to minimize that, make the most out of the water, early morning, early evening, and then always be checking on your tree. Are there wilting leaves? Is maybe there's some signs of water stress? Maybe it's time to water. And this kind of shows that drip line. So this is a trunk of our tree, but it's nice and big. Our drip line's out here. So this is where we're watering it, because this is where we're kind of estimating where those roots are. And then for newly planted desert adapted plants, this water use it wisely guide, which they're actually just released the new version of, which is very exciting, has tips on how frequently you should water newly planted trees. So for the summer or sometimes even spring, I would adhere to, this schedule, and then in the fall, you can kind of adhere to this schedule. And then once our tree is established, we can move over to this watering frequency. And you'll see, some of these gaps are pretty big, like 14 to 30 days. How do you know? Some of this can depend on what type of tree you have, and also really keeping up and checking, does your tree look stressed? Is it dry? Does it want water? So kind of just being aware of what's going on can help you find that sweet spot. Again, in our desert native trees are going to be our best trees and our lowest water use trees, where I know people that they planted it, watered it through the first summer, and then have never watered it since. And it's just been getting rain and maybe some runoff, and has grown. So if that's a concern, always go with our native trees for lowest water use. And then a few general things for young tree care to wrap up. Don't prune for the first year unless you have broken or diseased branches, but you really don't want to structure prune. Again, we want as many leaves as possible to maximize, the amount of food source for our tree and help it with establishment. And then when it is time to prune, less is better. A lot of landscaping companies love to prune and take away 50% of the canopy. You'd never want to remove more than 25% of the live canopy. And so if you are using landscapers to do this, this is definitely a conversation to have with them. I recommend being very clear about, what you're asking for. I want structure. Like if you see some bad branches, say, I want this branch and this branch taken off and like nothing else. And when in doubt, and if possible, hiring a certified arborist is always great. They have specific, tree climbing credentials, and have to continuing to certify their education. So they are going to be the experts. And then also we always especially at schools where landscapers are coming in and weed whacking, and that might be the case at your house too. We put tree guards on, which are like $5 or something at Home Depot that you can go and just put on the trunk of your tree to help it. Again, that cambium layer protect it from any damage. Um, and and we want to make sure we're using the right tools when it does come to pruning and consulting with an expert. Um, and so that is the end of our presentation. I know we're right at one. We do have some links here that kind of touch on some of the things we talked on, and I believe Jessica either sent some of these in the chat or is going to. But I highly recommend our Ask an Arborist Facebook page for any questions. You can post pictures in there, and we have certified arborists that volunteer answering those questions for free. So if
There
there
was a
are,
question from Glenda. She was saying that she has a Palo Verde in her backyard and noticed some strange groove looking coming from the tree. Um, and she wasn't sure what to do about it. I would recommend checking out that Facebook group, taking a picture of it, and you will get really great answers there. But I don't know, Allie, if you have something to add to that.
I was gonna say the same thing of yeah, to posting in that Facebook group and we have an arborist on there, Jake, and if you post a picture, and if you're looking for pruning advice or something, he'll even sometimes mark out the branches. So maybe take a few different pictures from a few different angles, so they can get a good look and maybe even help make those decisions for you.
And again, I want to thank everybody for being here. If you guys are interested in the next one, our next Lunch and Learn next month, we're going to be, it's going to be on water harvesting and nature-based home cooling strategies. And our guest speaker will be Ryan Wood, and he is from the city of Tempe, and he is a water conservation specialist. So if you would like to do that, you are more than welcome to sign up for that one. Allie, you did a really great job. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Thank you guys so much. Ruben, if you have a question, you go ahead.
Do you want to unmute people?
Okay, that is better because
There
that's a
you
long question.
go.
Um, I was just gonna ask, so one of my coworkers, I mean, we have like a space. It's a very small space, so I don't think this question even really applies, but I want to ask it anyways. Um, let's see, I think the space is like 2 feet by like 10 feet, 10 inches deep, and he's like wondering if there's any small trees that could even potentially fit in there. I'm like, I don't think so, but he just wanted me to ask.
I think it would be pretty tough, but some of our smaller trees don't need a huge amount of soil volume. Is it in like I'm kind of imagining it in a parking lot situation? Is that kind of
No,
what
so
it is?
it's
No.
it's inside, but it's like we have like an open skylight,
Oh,
so it's
okay.
sunlight all the time.
Okay, if it gets sunlight and also is like there's water available to it, I would say maybe some of our smaller trees could potentially go in there. Desert willows or vitex or maybe even a mulga acacia. Um, or a desert hackberry. Those are kind of a few trees that are a little bit smaller, maybe sometimes even a little bit more bushy, but could work in that space.
Okay, that's cool. I'll let him know.
Thanks, Ruben.
Of course.
All right, well, if nobody has any other questions, we'll probably close out this meeting here. Again, thank you guys so much. We really, really appreciate you coming here. Yeah, Les, I can go ahead and send you those links in an email.